Welcome back, students. This is Module 2.4.1, Introduction to Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is our fourth and final topic in Unit 2. Last class, we learned about how energy is liberated from food by cellular respiration. This is a process which occurs in virtually all cells. And we found that most organisms have at least some of the biochemical pathways of respiration in common. This commonality was one of the evidences for the relatedness of all life. And glycolysis in particular was the universal precursor. And of course, you should just recall the basic definition of cellular respiration. That is the release of energy or the transformation of energy in food into the form that's useful at the cellular level of ATP. Here was a summary equation. You should recall that respiration is a catabolic process that breaks down the large glucose molecule, breaking the carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds, releasing that energy, and then resulting in the products of carbon dioxide and water. We can ask then a very basic question. We talk about how energy is released from food, but the more basic question is, where does food itself come from? Remember, in a biological sense, food is complex biological macromolecules, including carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And so then that basic question, where does that food come from? Well, we can ask, well, there's a hint. What is the source of energy that humans and virtually all life depends upon? And of course, in the ecology unit, you learn this, and you know that it would, of course, be photosynthesis. No big surprise given the topic of this module. But here's some experts on the subject, Frank and Ernest. Ernest says, "Hey, Frank, look at that. I've always wondered why people get fat and plants don't. And now I know. What's the answer? Plants are light eaters, RDRR. And really the best part is this little panel on the left. And it's very accurate scientifically. It says, photosynthesis, plants turning sunlight into food energy. In the process of photosynthesis, sunlight is absorbed by the green pigment chlorophyll in plants and used to turn carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates and oxygen. This is the basis of the food chain and yada, 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 etc., etc. But really, the very, very best part is right there where one little daisy has a parasol and her friend says she's on a diet. If only dieting were so easy. So let's start by asking you kind of an interesting question. What did you have for breakfast this morning? And we probably, if I could hear your responses, I'd get a variety of different responses. Some had cereal, some had yogurt, some had bacon and eggs, some had, I don't know, fruit, something. A variety of answers would probably be given. But in point of fact, there's a great convergence in what you had for breakfast, unless, of course, you didn't have any. And that is because the sun is the ultimate source of energy that is made available by this process of photosynthesis. The sun is a star, so everyone who ate had starlight this morning. So do you feel better knowing that? Perhaps not. It turns out that not all life, but certainly the vast majority of life on Earth is powered by energy from the sun, and it's captured by the producers using this process of photosynthesis. And you may have in your mind that only plants use photosynthesis. This is not correct. In fact, members of 4 kingdoms have some sort of photosynthetic process that they use. Archaeobacteria, bacteria, protists, and plants. And so these are 4 unique groups. And in fact, the protists are more diverse than this artificial grouping implies. And so here we can check it out. It's not just plants. And dude, I don't think I'm a light eater. I guess not. Kind of funky. All right. We know that all organisms can be categorized into 2 different groups, 2 groupings. Heterotrophs, the other feeders, and autotrophs, the self-feeders. We learned the definitions of both of these when we addressed ecology, and we're learning about trophic interactions and food chains and food webs. Photoautotrophs are those that use sunlight to make their own food. They use the process of photosynthesis. They can use simple inorganic molecules such as carbon dioxide and water to make carbohydrates. Now, this is something that the heterotrophs simply cannot do. I want you to be aware when I said that the majority of life depends upon the photoautotrophs, this is true, but there is another group of producers that do not use photosynthesis and sunlight, and you should just be aware of this exception. These are the chemoautotrophs. These are only bacteria, they're only prokaryotes, I mean they're exclusively prokaryotes, and they use chemical reactions to make their own food. Often they link sulfur atoms together in a series of chemical reactions. But I just do want you to be aware of this. Some of these occur at hydrothermal vents, cracks in the crust of the earth beneath the ocean where hot water and chemicals spew out, and we get this unique community that we didn't know existed. They sent down some of the deep sea submersibles, things like WHOI, that's Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, sent down a submersible called Alvin, and it was called Alvin because that's the most troublesome of the three chipmunks, and Alvin was difficult, as it just is by the very nature of trying to work at great depths in the ocean where there's no light and there's great pressure. And I want to key in on that fact that there's no light. The zone in the bottom of the ocean, way, way away from shore, is called the abyss, and this is beyond the light. And it was here where hydrothermal vents were, and they could tell there was a hydrothermal vent by heat registers or something. They could tell there was some seismic activity or something occurring there. And so they sent Alvin down to investigate, and they thought it was going to be a barren desert without any life, and they found rather that there was life everywhere. There were these huge worms, as big around as a garden hose, 10 feet long. They're called pogonophrans. They're white and they have red heads. And Alvin's little clunky mechanical arms reached out and grabbed a piece of one of these large worms, brought it in, they analyzed, and they found it was full of symbiotic bacteria. These were mutualists that were living inside, and they were of course, doing chemosynthesis, linking sulfurs together. And they found lots of spaghetti worms, which look kind of like cooked spaghetti, out there on the rocks. And they found little crabs and other things. This whole ecosystem that was unexpected was found right there. Anyway, that's about enough about chemoautotrophs. We better get going. Want to remind you one more time, all flesh is grass, and this is just simply stating that heterotrophs are ultimately dependent upon autotrophs, especially photoautotrophs, by the mechanism of food chains. Of course, this is simply saying that plants capture sunlight and transform it into food, which feed all other organisms, or the vast majority. Saying all kind of disrespects the chemoautotrophs, I suppose. Just to introduce this bit on photosynthesis, I want to remind you that we've been talking about processes that cells undergo, and photosynthesis is another process of some cells. Not all cells undergo photosynthesis, as all cells underwent some form of cellular respiration, but some do. And photosynthesis is the process in which light energy is used to synthesize chemical energy in the form of organic compounds like glucose, which is, of course, a carbohydrate. We can think of photosynthesis at some levels as being the opposite of respiration. And when we look at the summary equation of photosynthesis, we can say, oh yeah, that looks very familiar. It's like we just grabbed the equation for cellular respiration, and we made what were the products in the respiration equation into the reactants here, and we made what were the reactants in respiration into the products of photosynthesis. So this is photosynthesis. Notice we have small molecules that are being linked together into a large molecule. So this is a building or synthetic process. So this would be an anabolic reaction. So remember that photosynthesis is indeed an anabolic process. And you should know the answer to this question. Does this mean that it requires or releases energy? And just to kind of emphasize the parallel nature of the two equations. And I expect you to be able to produce either equation upon request, and you need to know which one is which. So just remember which one's building, which one's taking down. It should be easy because synthesis in the name means you're building bigger molecules. And notice here are the two molecules, the two summary equations together. Equation 1, photosynthesis, showing where the food comes from, and respiration, showing us how the food is released. And notice that the ATP are not included down here, but certainly ATP are what is released by the breakdown of glucose into carbon dioxide and water. And here's just a basic view for you to think about of photosynthesis. The sun shines on green leaves, and so there's a green pigment in there that we'll be talking about. And in the process, carbon dioxide is used, water is absorbed, and oxygen is released. That's about the basics of photosynthesis. So this ends our first introductory module for the topic.